on my mind.
Somebody in a parachute has just landed on the edge of the ring. Holyfield bit by a dirty Mike Tyson. Fury has managed to get up.
Hello and welcome to episode 55 of the award-winning combat sports podcast, The Boxing Show. With me, your host, Rob Tebbutt. As always, I'd like to remind everybody to please like, comment and subscribe. Turn your notifications on for more boxing content. Now that's out of the way, it's just the two of us this week, myself and Mr. Andy Clarke. Barry Jones is elsewhere as he seeks further paychecks that supersede what he gets here at The Boxing Show.
He wasn't very forthcoming, was he, about why he couldn't make it today? He just said he couldn't do Monday.
No, he did call me on an Arabic phone number though, so I don't
Did
think
he?
that could have something to do with it. I think he's out
okay.
there. He's out there bringing through the next generation of stars in broadcasting world over in Saudi Arabia. So we don't know what Barry's doing. I think yeah, who knows? Yeah,
Anything is possible.
Yeah, you don't want to dig too deeply with Barry because you never know what he's going to be doing. You never know what his response is to you asking him what he's going to be doing either. So it's sometimes best just to be like, okay, Barry, maybe see you next time.
Yeah, you don't want to launch yourself down that rabbit hole on a Sunday afternoon.
No,
anything
you don't.
can happen.
But I did see him on Saturday night. He was sat in front of me, as we were, of course, at the Chris Billam-Smith versus Richard Riakporhe 2 card, which we'll start off with in a short while. But it will just be the two of us today, a bit more of an intimate setting. I thought it'd be better to do this than constantly be told, oh, well, you only do a podcast once a month. So, two of us is better than none of us, although some may argue different.
All of Deck Taylor's fake accounts.
He's in France as well, Deck Taylor.
He fires up every time we don't do a podcast.
Yeah.
I haven't seen him for a bit, actually.
Yeah, he's been working away. He's been doing quite a lot of stuff on the Boxing News magazine, remember, out every Thursday at your nearest newsagent. So we'll get a subscription, obligatory plug. But no, yeah, he's doing well. He's been in France. I don't know what it is, but all of the Boxing News like writers and everyone's going on holiday apart from me, Andy. I don't understand. It's terrible. Like these summer, like, everyone's part timers. But anyway, we're certainly not on holiday, and we had a very, very busy weekend of boxing. So let's start there. Let's start with this weekend's WBO, or last weekend's WBO cruiserweight title fight between Chris Billam-Smith and Richard Riakporhe at Selhurst Park. A comfortable unanimous decision victory for Chris Billam-Smith, albeit not on the scorecards, which we'll kind of come on to later on, but a comprehensive victory for Chris Billam-Smith.
Yeah, it really was, wasn't it? And the cards, we had a 116, 111 and 2 115, 112, so 8 rounds to 4 and 2 7 rounds to 5. I thought it was a pretty easy fight to score, and it was 10 rounds to 2. I would have struggled to have found more than 2 rounds for Riakporhe. Not that he didn't play a part, not that he wasn't competitive, not that he didn't land some good stuff at times, but I thought Billam-Smith was terrific. He's all of the things that we know he is, which is disciplined, pays enormous attention to detail, gets himself into tremendous shape, listens to his trainer, is able to implement the plan even when we've seen him fighting through a bit of a fog. He was able to do that, which is a difficult thing to do. And he just put it all into place on Saturday with kind of ease, really. And it was impressive to watch. It was really impressive to watch. He just never allowed Riakporhe to be at the distance he wanted to be at, to throw that right hand. And for that reason, he never really managed to land it. Most of Chris's good work was done on the inside, but it was quite easy to see it. I think sometimes, maybe the judges didn't see all of it, but sometimes the danger is that it can get a little bit lost. But sitting ringside from where I was at my side of the ring, it was comfortably easy enough to see that he was winning those rounds, and he was winning them clearly. And there was no sense that he was ever going to abandon the plan and get greedy, as people say, and try and give himself a bit more room to lengthen his punches out and maybe stop Riakporhe, because he just didn't need to. So it was made, probably the best performance of his career, I would say, because as a champion, you kind of tend to grow a bit, don't you? And he's gone away to somebody else's backyard, and the bookmakers made Riakporhe a favourite, and everybody was talking all week about how he was too close to call and all that kind of thing. And he took it away from him, and he did it with ease.
it's not something that we've grown accustomed to talking about with Chris Billam-Smith. He's had some brilliant fights, sort of in and around not domestic level, European level. Had that great fight with Isaac Chamberlain. Even the Arman Jojai fight was very entertaining, kind of firefight until he got the stoppage. I mean, going back, the Vasil Dutsar fight was entertaining. But this is the first time where I think it's, the intelligence of him, the game plan. Obviously, has a great relationship with Shane McGuigan in the corner, who's implemented this game plan and he's followed it to a T. But intelligence and kind of discipline and all of that comes with it isn't something that you ordinarily associate with him, is it?
No, not always, because he does love a ruck, doesn't he? He loves a tear up. I remember talking to his wife after his last fight at Christmas, and she was just saying, God, he just loves a tear up, Chris. I hate it, but he loves it. And on Saturday, that wasn't what he did. He just stuck exactly to what he was being told, and that's an indication of how somebody can get better as they get older, because physically, past a certain age, you will start to deteriorate. How rapidly that happens depends on how you live, basically, and I think he will manage to decelerate that decline as much as you can, because he definitely does everything right. But on the flip side of that, what you can improve at is how well you listen to someone, how well you take information on board, because you will realise that it's more important, because that physicality and that resistance that could maybe get you out of trouble beforehand, maybe as you go on a bit, you realise that's not quite what it used to be, so I need to listen more, I need to put the plan into place more, I need to kind of evolve in that way. Not everyone can do that. That's a sign of intelligence in itself, if you can realise that and act upon it. But I think all of those things are in play with him. He can take a massive shot. We all know that. But that doesn't mean that that's the way you need to win, because people can fall in love with numerous things, can't they? One can be their own power if they're a massive puncher, but the other can be your ability, can be your own chin if you're not careful. Yeah, if you're not careful, it can happen. So to kind of have the wherewithal to look at everything in the round, 360 degrees, and kind of realise what it is that you need to do to keep getting better as you get older. You have to be really self-analytical and self-aware. And athletes aren't always. They aren't always. Sometimes there's this kind of denial that they're needing to look at things slightly differently. I mean, I could be barking up the wrong tree here. Chris might, if he watches this, might listen to this and just think, what on earth is he talking about? Or he might kind of hear it and think, yeah, that does happen as you get older. But whatever it is that's happened, it's probably better now than he's ever been.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something that we've spoken about here in the past, and something that one of the things that you've said that I've related to people is the great line that he gave you about drinking alcohol. Yeah, I'm not talented enough to drink alcohol. Yeah, and we've done in the past a day in the life sort of thing. He has his mouth tape and he has these infrared goggles that to block out the sun, and these little 0.5% and these little kind of micro gains that you can get through looking after yourselves, as you've mentioned there, and doing the right things in camp all the time. And it's not something that, it's not to say that every talented fighter doesn't work as hard as your kind of blue collar guy, because, ideally you fuse the two, which is where you get your great fighters. But he has sort of squeezed every last little ounce out of everything that he's done over the last couple of years. I mean, you think about going back to July of 2022, the Isaac Chamberlain fight, which came pretty short notice, and then there on in from there, kind of went and boxed Arman Jojai at the Christmas. We kind of had these, and this is something that we'll kind of come on to when we talk about Richard Riakporhe and kind of where the future goes for him. But having those regular appointments, if you will, to box, and the Jojai fight went 5 rounds, so it was a 12-round fight. We have a 12-round camp. The Isaac Chamberlain fight was a 12-round fight, fought at a very good pace. And those kind of experiences at those checkpoints over the last couple of years, and then the Okoli fight and the Masternak fight, have really built him over the last couple of years. When you compare that to Richard Riakporhe, I think he boxed 5 minutes in the last 18 months against Dylan Brejon, who's sort of a capable fringe European guy, but it's not enough. And you see where they've gone from the first fight, and how much stock people were putting into the first fight, I'm not quite sure, but I'd imagine a fair bit, particularly when you consider that Riakporhe was quite a sizable favourite going into the fight. The career progression since those points for both of those guys, Chris Billam-Smith and Richard Riakporhe, have been chalk and cheese.
Yeah, they have, and it's it's easy to trace that when you look at it, and you're not being wise after the event, because we've you said that. We spoke last week, and I never give a prediction on the week of a fight, but I did fancy Billam-Smith. And plenty of people I spoke to would corroborate that, because of all the things you just said. He's had more fights, he's boxed more at a better level, he's more experienced, he's just ticked so many more boxes. And I felt for Riakporhe at the end of the fight, because that's a huge night for him at a stadium, his own stadium, and he's not going to get that opportunity again. It's not impossible that he would box at Palace again, but he's not going to get that opportunity as an undefeated fighter to become a world champion in front of your home fans. And this will be a tough one to take. He's probably having a terrible time of it at the minute, and probably will continue to do so for the next couple of weeks at least, as he tries to explain this one to himself. Because when you get outdone comprehensively like that, those are probably the worst. Because what positives do you take from it if you're him? I don't want to be too bleak, but there really aren't many, are there?
No, there aren't.
Unless you just kind of admit to yourself, not to anyone else, but you admit to yourself, okay, I know what happened there. I just froze. If that's what happened, that can be the reason you can give to yourself. You wouldn't publicise it, but that'd be the reason you can give to yourself to move on from it, if that is indeed the case. But yeah, the way the careers have gone since, that right there is why Billam-Smith won the fight. You can take other things like talent and things like that out of the equation almost, and just think those diverging paths since they first boxed, that is why Billam-Smith beat him. Kind of just to touch on something else you said about his ability to work hard and the discipline and all of that. The more I do this, the more I think that in itself is a talent.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because people talk about talent, that this kind of like the talent myth almost, as people term it, and it is really fascinating what you can define as being kind of innate, inherent. Either you have it or you don't have it, or some people have more of it than others, and what is down to conditions, and the 10,000 hours and all that kind of stuff. And there are certain things I think that either you have or you don't, or some people have to a much larger degree than others, just like natural athleticism, fast twitch fibres, reflexes. In boxing, that natural inherent ability to just keep going at all costs. I do think it can be improved, but some people have just got that from the beginning and it never leaves them. But the ability to buckle down and be disciplined and make sacrifices and not be drawn into temptation, whatever it may be, and the ability to listen and to assimilate that information in a massively stressful situation like a boxing ring, and then put it into practice, that is definitely a talent. Because if everyone could do it, they would all be doing it. But they don't all do it. So quite obviously they can't all do it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you make there about kind of the golf and where Richard was on the night. I mean, I actually was with both of them the following morning at the breakfast table. I love breakfast, we all know this. I was at the I don't want to say the name of the hotel. We're at the Fight Hotel the morning after, and they were both speaking to each other. And Richard said, I was basically wanted to box for a world title. I think they weren't saying this. Kind of went down the Gulamarian route, and then that didn't happen for whatever reason. So obviously now, it was great to box you and blah blah blah. And Chris said to Richard, get a proper fight next. Box a 12-round fight against a decent name. So you've got enough power where you can get rid of somebody in 2 or 3 rounds anyway, but you're training for a 12-round fight. We've all seen Richard looking rather glamorous on the various catwalks. I mean, we're still waiting for our call, Andy. We'll see when that comes out. But doing Fashion Week and dressed head to toe in Burberry and, hanging with Madonna and horses and stuff like that, all the other things he's been gallivanting around doing over the last couple of years. He's only had one scheduled 8-rounder in the last 18 months. Billam-Smith, even going before the kind of what we've talked about on Boxeo, he had those 2 fights with Tommy McCarthy, which were 12-round fights, and also had a lot of needle between the camps as well, dealing with that. Yeah, big fights. Vasyl Dutsar, know your boxing, you know how dangerous he is, and this is kind of before he's got a little bit weathered now, as you will do with fighting unbeaten prospects like every other week, like Vasyl Dutsar has done over the last 5 years. But that was a really hard, grueling fight. And you take the camps and you take all of the inexperience and experiences that you gain or lose throughout all of those fights, and it crafts you into being a fighter. Richard's now 34, and it's going to be interesting to see how he goes about that, where he goes next, what opportunities are going to be worth his kind of time to carry on, because we've spoken about this in the past about, you mentioned it there, how fighters deal with defeat, how they kind of internalize it. He may think, this was inactivity, I didn't have those rounds, I need to do this, but is he going to want to come back and box on, third way down in a 12 rounder against I don't know, Jack Massey fight? The first one was awful, so I don't really want to see the second fight, but somebody of that ilk, he kind of needs to go back in at a good level.
A big fight they could make would be him and Isaac Chamberlain.
I'm not sure that would happen.
I know they go back because I remember going to see Isaac at Miguel's in Brixton probably 7 or 8 years ago. Richard was there, so maybe that wouldn't happen for that reason. But it's difficult to know where Richard is, because he won a British title, scrappy fight against Jack Massey, but Jack Massey, he's a really good fighter. He didn't catch fire that night, but he won a British title, and now he's lost a world title fight, but lost it comprehensively to a strong, established world champion. Where between those two levels is he? I'm not expecting you to tell me, because I don't know. And I don't think anybody can know, really.
No, and with the wins that he's had over the last few years, I mean, you look at before the Brajon fight, it was Gvozdyk, who hadn't boxed since he lost every round and was stopped by Lawrence Okoli 18 months before then. So, it's difficult to gauge. And this is kind of it's the double-edged sword. When Richard Riakporhe signed to Boxer, he boxed Twardowski in an 8 round, and he didn't look great, and he was shaking off the ring rust, and he'd obviously had the hand injury and the managerial problems. He hadn't boxed. But then after then, kind of getting him guys who, weren't at their best, should we say, even like the likes of Dion Juma. Dion Juma had his injury problems and kind of went away from the sport and come back again. And these fights are ending in 2 or 3 rounds because he has that natural punching power and he can get rid of guys, but you're not learning from those bouts necessarily. Fabio Turchi, you're getting rid of him in 2 rounds.
That kind of first year of Boxer, though, at least he was boxing regularly, wasn't he?
But then
and if that had continued, then it might be a different story.
And that's
now.
the thing, though. You get to that world title level, and the way that cruiserweight's been, particularly over the last couple of years, Gulamirian and Egorov kind of held the WBA hostage for 3 or 4 years between them, with fights that did and didn't happen. Obviously, you had Badu Jack and him going he was going to go to Bridgeway, and he was WBC champion in recess, and then Don King got hold of one of the belts, which kind of makes it all a little bit more murky. Shout out Don. So he's kind of been in that political situation. Opataya there was going to be a deal there. Then he went to Matchroom and then this. So he's kind of treaded water a little bit recently and found himself back in the position of where he was almost when he signed for Boxer at the start against Twardowski, where he's going into the fight with no real preparation behind him, and that gauge of how good he is and those boxes that he ticked really in some capacity in 2018, 2019, around that period of time, kind of faded, and he needs to tick them again. And you kind of factor that in with, living a very, very different life now than the Richard Riakporhe from Miguel's gym. I remember that setup back then with Isaac Chamberlain, Richard Riakporhe, John Harding Jr., Chris Congo, Dillian White,
Rakim was down
there.
Rakim
Noble, Ted Bammy was the coach, and that's why I'm not sure.
Great gym to go to, wasn't it? Because it was sparring day Monday, was it, or Wednesday? But you just turn up and
there'd
be on rotation.
You see Dillian White sparring Chris Congo, like you had Dillian White sparring Chris Congo in the ring, and John Harding Jr. sparring Richard Riakporhe.
I saw that when I went down there the day I kind of remember, because I'd not heard much about him, to be honest, and then he appeared on a Sky undercard. It was Dillian White, Oscar Rivas, got put down by
on the Lucas Brown undercard. Adam Williams.
That's right. Yeah. And then got off the floor and finished him off, and you thought to yourself, okay, there's something to work with there.
And then he boxed on the White. He boxed on the Usyk Bellew undercard. He boxed Sam Hyde. Yeah. And that was a fight that he was losing every round until he landed the right hand. He landed the right hand, caused the injury to Sam Hyde. And then that kind of, as it can do with power punches, as we've seen in the past, it can paper over the cracks. We've seen it with Deontay Wilder and countless others in recent times, where people don't remember the fact that he was losing every round to Sam Hyde. They remember the picture of Sam Hyde with the massive swelling and the fact that it says TKO 8 or 9 or whatever it was for Richard Riakporhe. So it's interesting. He's in an interesting predicament at the minute, or position to where his next fight is, because I'm not sure that coming back and having an 8-rounder or a 10-rounder against a guy you're going to blow away in a round or two is necessarily more than anything, the right mental state he needs to be in now, if indeed challenging for world titles, becoming a world champion is still important to him. Or is it not? And if it's not, do you take a big fight and try... I did sort of tongue-in-cheek say to Ben Shalom afterwards, let's please not see a Coley versus Riakporhe, because I'm not sure that'd be the most pretty fight on the eye, the easiest fight on the eye. But does he try and get a big fight? Does he move up to heavyweight and then just kind of...
That's a real key question, isn't it? Because people always talk during the week about, there's always someone who's tight at the weight, and it does kind of make me laugh because loads of people are tight at the weight. Basically everyone's tight at the weight, and if you're not, then you're probably in the wrong division. But he is massive, and you look at him in there, you look at the shoulders on him and the back on him, and I thought he did look pretty dry at the weigh-in, but I didn't think he looked terrible by any stretch. I thought he looked pretty good, but maybe that will be what they'll look to try and do, take him up to heavyweight and see if that works for him. But for me, it's not really the weight, it's the mechanics, isn't it? I think that's what it's about with him. Because if you've got that power, that's great, but you have to land it. You have to find a way of making it count, because as you're on your way up, you may get opponents who aren't that good, and they're not just going to stand there and let you hit them. But maybe the setup isn't that complicated. But then when you get to world title level, it is. It is complicated. Despite what people may think, Chris Billam-Smith is not going to stand there and let you hit him on the chin. If it happens, he can take it, but it's not what he wants. He's going to make it hard for you to do it. And he definitely made it hard for him to do it on Saturday. And everybody else will make it hard for you to do it. Can he do it? That's the question. Can he set it up? Has he got the ability to do that?
It might be the case of him doing it at heavyweight as well. Against heavyweights, you've got guys who tend to be less fleet-footed. You see the shots come in, and he's a big guy. I'm sure he can move up. I'm sure he could quite easily get in the ring at 220, 224 and be what he was on, well, maybe not at the weekend, but be perfectly fine at that weight. Moving on moving back to Chris Billam-Smith. Obviously, after the fight, spoke pretty openly about wanting that Vegas away day against Zurdo Ramirez. And to be fair, based on certainly the last 3 fights, you'd make him a pretty decent favourite in that fight. I thought Zurdo Ramirez beat Gulamirian well, but Gulamirian had boxed once in 3.5-4 years. Obviously, we've seen Zurdo bursting at the seams, first at 168 and 175, but I think you'd have to hack off several limbs of Chris Billam-Smith to make him a light heavyweight or a super middleweight. So you'd feel that, particularly now that, Chris and Shane McGuigan will kind of say that, we've always been able to box and blah, 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 blah. But now we've seen kind of, I don't want to say a new or different side of him, but the discipline that he showed at the weekend against a very dangerous fighter in Richard Riakporhe. Okay, people can say that he didn't do this, he didn't do that. Chris Billam-Smith and Shane McGuigan say he didn't do this because I didn't allow him to do it.
Right,
I'm not standing at that long-range territory for him to detonate one of the right hands. And also one of the things that was impressive about Billam-Smith's performance was, even when the success was coming for him, he didn't overdo it. He didn't try and turn the screw and get. No,
he never deviated. He never deviated.
Shane McGuigan said afterwards, he said it was, we saw Carl Frampton versus Scott Quigg. It was win the fight.
Yeah.
Was it the most entertaining fight? Was it Frampton versus Santa Cruz or Frampton versus Kiko Martinez? No, but win the fight. It's a big fight. It's about winning the fight, taking the belt, and going home. And that's what he did at the weekend.
It totally is about that. But when you get to that level, that really is what it's about. On your way up, if you're entertaining and you sell tickets, and he's always ticked both of those boxes, Billam-Smith, brilliant. But when you get a world title belt, you need to keep it. And whatever the most efficacious way to go about that is, then that is what you do. If he finds himself in a position where he's going to have a firefight, we know he can do that. It's not like he's all of a sudden going to completely change and become this, just dull fighter who does whatever he can to negate the opponent. You have to negate the opponent. And I completely agree that one of the reasons why Riakporhe wasn't able to really do anything is because he just wasn't really allowed to. He wasn't really in a position where he could. And I would love to see those fights. I would love to see him in with Ramirez. I'd love to see him in with Opetaia, because I make those two winnable fights. I'd say Ramirez is more winnable than Opetaia, but I still think Opetaia is very winnable. I do think Opetaia is a really good fighter, but over the last year or so, this narrative has emerged around him that nobody's really disagreed with, which is that he's clearly the best cruiserweight in the world. Is he? I mean, I don't really know. He won the title against Breedis, and that was a massive win. Make no mistake, because it was a huge step up. Inactivity due to the jaw and various other things. Comfortable wins against Thompson and Zorro. Did exactly what he was expected to do, given the level we think he's at. That last fight against Breedis was really interesting, though. I was there for that, and he boxed a really smart fight. 8-9 rounds in, he's won every round probably, and Breedis needs to stop him. But then it wasn't that far away from happening. He really made a dent in him towards the end there, from kind of nowhere, really. Now, Breedis has been a tremendous fighter, and I wouldn't say that Billam-Smith, a peak Billam-Smith and a peak Breedis. You look at what Breedis did against Usyk. Yeah, he's real top level. Breedis, top level. Is, yeah. But he's 39 years old. And Billam-Smith can bring a heat that a 39-year-old Breedis can't, I believe. So I make those both. They're both fights I'd love to see. And why not both? If he wins the first one, you can do both, can't you?
Yeah, and it seems at the minute, I mean, Oppenheimer is very much in favour with the Saudi kind of, the Saudi outfit.
Chris fancies Vegas, but I'm sure he wouldn't be too disappointed if he got the call to go over to Riyadh.
You could do Oppenheimer against Noel Gvozdyk for the WBC, and then you do Billam-Smith versus Zurdo Ramirez, and then you can do the Undisputed.
That's kind of how they roll, isn't it?
Yeah, the Saudis love the Undisputed, getting a new Saudi Undisputed belt for the winner of that. That seems like a reasonable kind of plan for both guys. But just on Oppenheimer there, because I feel like the first Breedis fight, we watched it on a dodgy stream. Sorry, no UK broadcast. We're going to watch it however we can. And not many people, I don't think, watched that. It was Australian time. He was very, very good for the first 7 or 8 rounds. And then Breidis really, I mean, there's pouring it on, and there's almost coming close to stopping him, which is what he did in that first fight. He had the year out. I think he had some issues behind the scenes, as well as obviously allowing the jaw to heal. And then with respect to Jordan Thompson, Ellis Oro, they're not world-class operators. They haven't proven to be world-class operators. They're sort of there or thereabouts at British level. I mean, that's not that's a great British level. That's just a fact, exactly. Yeah. But the Breidis fight, as you mentioned there, it was kind of a microcosm of the first fight, where it just took Breidis a little bit longer because he's a little bit longer in the tooth, and Oppenheimer had been a little bit more active. But those last couple of rounds, and I mean, Oppenheimer was very sharp for 5 or 6, kind of boxed like a guy thinking, right, I know you're going to come on.
Yeah, he was up on his toes. He was on the outside. He's still got that kind of style. It's really interesting watching him. We saw him in the gym during the week, that week too, and he was totally happy for us all to come down, the whole Sky team. It was a sign of real confidence, I thought, where he's just like listen, come, bring as many people as you want to film, whatever you like. And I mean, there's a lot to like about him as a fighter and a character. He's good to be around. He's intense. I like the kind of vibe he brings to Fight Week, all of that stuff. But every now and again, I think it does happen that a consensus emerges that may turn out to be true. But at the time it emerges, is it based on... What's it really based on? And with him, it was based on the win against Breidis. But that second fight, it does... I mean, there's 2 ways of looking at everything. You could look at that second fight and just think, right, well, he showed us he had the minerals in the first fight, and then he showed us again. Like, this guy's bursting with minerals. And I think that's true. But if I was an opponent, I would look at that and then think, interesting, is what I would think. Yeah, and if you're Billam-Smith, again, it's one of those where both guys have shown that they've got plenty of minerals, and it could come down to the game planning. So before this weekend, potentially that's something that people would have said, but Chris Billam-Smith just comes forward and he's always in wars. And, the kind of narrative going into the Riakporhe fight at the weekend was if Riakporhe can hit him the same amount of times as Masternak. Well, if your auntie had balls, it's one of those situations. And it's Masternak, who's a very accomplished fighter in and around world level for a long period of time. But you can kind of make allowances fighting a guy who doesn't have lights out power compared to somebody who does in Riakporhe. And Billam-Smith has now shown he can be mindful. It affects how you go into it as well. Like in an ideal world, when you're a world champion or even when you're not, you go into every fight completely respectful of your opponent. Mentally, you're tuned into absolutely everything. You're not taking anything for granted. You're not overlooking anything. But these are humans. And what happens is, if you're fighting Matias Masternak, as much as you respect his toughness, it's probably not at the front of your brain that you've got to be really fucking careful you don't get clips because he's got lights out power, because that actually doesn't really. And so it just happens that you end up taking a few more than you should. Because no matter how much you tell yourself that that's the mindset you need to be in, that back of your brain, or whatever you want to call it, it's whispering the opposite to you, because you know that actually he doesn't have that power, mate. Like, I see what you're doing, but he doesn't. And so you end up boxing the way he did against Masternak. Now, Riakporhe does. So you're that bit more switched on. And it happens. Like Matt was saying to me during the week, Macklin, he said sometimes you can spar with someone and get buzzed by them, and they can't punch at all. But you've taken them lightly, and all of a sudden you've been hit, and your head's spinning. And then you spar with someone who's supposed to be an absolute killer, and you're that tuned in and that alive to it that you don't get hit. And when you do, you're so ready for it, you think, oh, that was okay, that wasn't that bad.
Did you say that about Golovkin or not? Sorry, Matt.
It's the one subject I don't really bring up. But these are all the things that happen, aren't they, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. Right, before we move on from the main event, Chris Billam-Smith, last few fights, Lawrence Okoli, Matthias Masternak, Richard Riakporhe. We don't have too many world champions at the minute, but where does he sit in your kind of, I don't want to kind of get into a mythical pound-for-pound British rankings or anything like that, but when you consider those wins, I mean, cruiserweight, not the sexiest division in the world, as we all know. Sorry, Chris, and all the other cruiserweights out there, please don't hit me. Well, I'm a heavyweight, I'm a size advantage. Where does Chris Billam-Smith stand now in kind of the British boxing landscape, if you will?
Well, he's very, very established now, isn't he? He's two of those guys were undefeated. Nobody had come remotely close to beating Okoli, not even remotely. And because it was two of our own guys up against each other, we can tend to underrate wins when that happens. I think we could tend to underrate our own a bit. I think that's kind of natural. But yeah, I mean, as you say, we don't have that many world champions. Fury was always top of the tree, but he isn't one anymore. He could be again soon. But he isn't one at the moment. And then when you think about the others, Kachache has recently won a world title. Lee Wood is still or is not still. He's vacated, hasn't he, and moved up. Sonny Edwards was until fairly recently. Male fighters we're talking about here. Okoli's Bridgerweight world champion. He's got to be. He does have to be top of the tree, doesn't he? I think.
Yeah, I can't really think of many others. We're not blessed with an awful lot of world champions at the minute. So as far as kind of world champions go, yeah. Didn't expect us to win with him as number one of that, but there you go, Mr. Billam-Smith, number one. But anyway, move on from the main event and talk about the undercard. We're going to start off in the cruiserweight division as well. We'll start off with the undercard in the cruiserweight division as well for a massive win for Jack Massey, now the European and Commonwealth cruiserweight champion. Close fight through the first 8 rounds, I felt, but really finished strong, Jack Massey, and got over the line with what I thought was a very, very impressive performance.
Yeah, me too. I really, really enjoyed the fight because it toed and froed, and that's what you want in a good fight, isn't it? I thought he started well. I always thought this was a really difficult one to call because Massey was a good amateur, good fundamentals. Isaac described him as an ABC fighter. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, if your ABCs are good, that means that's a great foundation. I'd say he is an ABC fighter, but if I were Massey, I'd have taken that as a compliment. He started well. Chamberlain came into it in the mid-rounds, had a really big 7th, won the 8th as well. And as you say, 4-4 at that point, I think was right. I think that's what I had. I think that's what Matt and Vidal, who were with me, had as well. We went into the Massey corner after 8 rounds. And it was interesting to hear kind of a coach, a really experienced coach in Joe Gallagher, basically just abandon any tactics at that point. Because you know what your fighter is, don't you? You know that when they're getting tired, he's got a good, well-schooled fighter there in Massey. So when he gets tired, he's going to try and hold on to that technique. He's not all of a sudden just going to come out swinging because you give him, the big G up, which is what he did. And like I say, he didn't talk tactics. He just talked purely about how much do you want this? Because this is it now. 4 each, 4 to go. This is the chance you've been waiting a really, really long time for. It might not come again. You've got to go out and get it. How much do you want it? And that was basically all he said to him. And it worked because I think he probably won 3 out of those last 4, didn't he?
I give him all 4.
Yeah, maybe all 4
yeah,
and won the fight. And I don't know what was happening in the other corner, but I think Bobby Mills was probably a bit more kind of, I'm not saying he made a mistake, but he's quite considered. He's calm. He gives you a while and then gives you those just little nuggets of advice. Maybe he did feel that Isaac needed it at that point because he'd won the previous couple of rounds and it was a case of just keep going. But what we heard was Gallagher, and he is a really experienced trainer, and I just love all that shit. You know, when it just gets down to that bit. That's what I love about boxing most, is that at that level, you know what they're like ability-wise. They'll box differently, stylistically, but ability-wise, you can kind of understand that they've got what they've got, or they wouldn't be there. And then it just gets to that point where, okay, there's no easy way to say this. If you want to win this, you're going to have to give of yourself. And that's it. And he did it. And it was a huge win for him. Huge, because we remember him stepping up to fight Joseph Parker, which at the time I thought was borderline irresponsible, mental. And I was worried that he was just going to get knocked out cold. To the point where I was quite nervous about it, because I don't really know Jack Massey, but I just really, really, really didn't want it to happen. And he did well. And that was a massive risk to get his name back out there. And since then, he still had to wait a long time. So that's a ginormous win in the context of his career. Difficult for Isaac now to rebuild off the back of that, because he'd won that British title, the Commonwealth title, step up, win the European. He boxed for it before. He's always felt that he's got the ability to win a world title. So that's he'll be having a tough time at the minute. That was a pretty big setback, I would say.
Yeah, sort of similar to Craig Richards, another South London boy, who kind of is now at the stage of. I mean, obviously, I feel like a loss to Jack Massey and a loss to Willie Hutchinson not quite the same at this stage of the career, but somebody like Isaac Chamberlain and Craig Richards have sort of been there and competed with the top guys, but never quite got over the line against them. And now they're kind of, if they're losing to other guys in and around British and European level, then where does the next fight go? I mean, you mentioned there about Richard Riakporhe. I can't quite see that happening. I think that they
Vidal. Would Boxer look at it and Sky look at it now and just think, okay, never mind you, Isaac, we've got no plans for you anymore. Let's put you in with Vidal, and hopefully Vidal will beat you. But if they do make that match, if you're going to be cold business about it, that would be what they wanted, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Obviously, what belt could be? Well, there not be a belt on the line for that now, would there?
Vidal's English champion, isn't he? Isaac's not really going to want to do that in the same way that Craig
Richards wouldn't want to box Whittaker.
Yeah. Because he wouldn't think he would win, but just because he would know what role he was being cast in. But at the same time, they've been doing this a while and they know the business, and they may well understand, the pair of them. I think they probably would actually, that their next fight could be one of them. If they want to get back up to where they think they belong, they're going to have to dip down a bit, beat someone who fancies taking their scalp, and then they can move back up again. Because trying to just kind of stay where you were off the back of a damaging defeat, that's not really going to happen. That's not really how the game works. I mean, those are two, I feel from having been around them quite a bit, those are two, they know how the world works. So I reckon they probably do know what they're going to get offered next. And they've just got to roll up their sleeves and take care of business, and then they can get back to where they want to be.
And for Jack Massey, I mean, I saw him back at the Fight Hotel after Saturday night. He had pizza in hand and was very happy with himself.
He was loving it.
Yeah, loving life. Saw him and Chris Billam-Smith kind of embrace and well done and blah, blah, blah. But is that a fight? I mean, people talking about, what next for Chris Billam-Smith. Jack Massey will put his hand up in the air, I'm sure. Obviously has a win over Chris Billam-Smith in the amateurs, which he likes to remind Chris Billam-Smith of at every opportunity. Is that a fight that you could foresee happening, or do you think Jack Massey's is a couple of fights away from that?
No, I could definitely see that happening if they can't get for Chris what they want. Or if there's going to be a bit of a wait and he needs to have a fight in the interim period. He's a twice-a-year fighter now, Billam-Smith, which is what happens when you become a world champion, really, isn't it? Because just things become that much more difficult to arrange. And arranging a fight with Ramirez or Opetaia probably isn't going to be straightforward.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Ramirez. Sorry to interrupt. It's going to be interesting what happens with Ramirez, because I think he's out of contract.
Okay.
He's out of contract, but I don't know whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, because quite often that can be detrimental to making a fight.
Yeah, if you're not really sure.
Yeah, because you've got various other promoters in your ears offering you this and offering you that, and sometimes if you have you have a relationship with an existing promoter, and we've seen Boxer do, sort of not known for doing business cross promotionally, just saying, but like in outside of that, they've done deals, and like Taylor Catchall, for example, with Top Rank, or shout out Bob Arum. So you would feel like they would be open to doing something like that. But I'm not sure what Ramirez's contractual situation is. He was with Golden Boy Promotions, of course. I'm not sure whether or not he's still attached to Xanfer in some way.
I kind of feel like the one that's going to be easiest to make, and the one that will probably happen for Billam-Smith, is Opataya rather than Ramirez. I know he said that he wants to go to Vegas or even LA and fight Ramirez, but I think Opataya will want. He very nearly came on the weekend. Opataya, he was. I think he was all set to come, and then I think maybe a bit of politics got involved. But he wants that fight. He wants that fight, and where there's the kind of will on the side of both fighters, the potential problems elsewhere, if it's going to be a Riyadh season fight, a Saudi fight, they're now taken out of the equation. As we know, those rivalries don't really exist in that context. So I do feel like that one would probably be quite straightforward to make. So I think it is more likely that he'll box Opataya than Ramirez.
And underneath that, you could go, I mean, as much as the first fight was really terrible, Riakporhe Massey 2, or Massey Riakporhe 2, because it'd be for Massey's European title. Chamberlain Riley.
Yeah, those are a good pair of fights, aren't they? Those are a good pair of fights. I think Massey would be up for that. Why wouldn't you be? That would be a decent payday, you would think, because it's easy to forget that that's really what it's about too. You win those titles and that's fantastic, but the money has to come off the back of them. That's where you really need to make your money, is when you've got that currency, basically. But I'd happily watch both of them.
Final one from Saturday's card at Selhurst Park. Your mate, Ben Whittaker, remains undefeated with a decision win over Ezra Arenyeka. I think we were all a little bit curious, should we say, about what we were going to encounter in the ring. Obviously, we saw Ezra Arenyeka, Let's Go champion, Ben Whittaker before the Wardley-Clarke fight, and then sort of turned up on fight week, and nobody still really knew an awful lot about him. There was kind of little tidbits and snippets on social media. Looked quite a withdrawn figure in fight week. I felt like, we had this conversation beforehand, that perhaps the gravitas and the occasion was maybe a bit real for him in the build-up to the fight. But equipped himself fairly well, I felt in there, Ezra Arenyeka, albeit not really coming close to troubling the scorecards, should we say, and for the last 30 seconds or so, almost got himself stopped. But yeah, thoughts on the performance from Ben Whittaker?
I thought it was a good performance. I thought it was a good solid performance, and it was a good 10 rounds for him to get, because what we didn't know, or what I couldn't really work out with Ezra, and I spoke to him a bit during the week. I sat down with him and Kev Marie and Jack Massey, one day at Box Park before we were getting going, and had a conversation and filled in a few blanks and all that kind of thing, because I just wanted to try and understand what we were going to get on the night from him, because the footage of him there was to watch, he didn't look great. And from what I've been told by people I know up north, where he's been for a good while, they kind of feared for him against Whittaker. The reason being that, as a fighter, he's tended to be quite gung-ho and aggressive. And the way that he called Whittaker out, I was thinking to myself, if he really thinks that he can win, and he goes in there and he's gung-ho and aggressive, it's going to end badly for him. But as it turned out, he was smarter than that. I wouldn't say he didn't try and win, but he was certainly very respectful of the person who was in front of him and wasn't going to make obvious glaring errors, because the big error that he makes is that when he commits to an attack and comes forward, he just goes straight over the top of his front foot, leans in, and that would have been like boxing suicide against Whittaker. But he very, very rarely did it. He tucked up really effectively. He's got lovely long arms, so when he clamped into that shell, there wasn't a lot to go on. He was in great condition, so when he did get hit with that left to the body, which happened plenty, despite that pretty effective guard, apart from once, he managed to take it. So he boxed a clever fight. He tried to get punches off when he could, but he just knew that there was a big gulf in ability between himself and Whittaker, and I wasn't sure whether that awareness would be there or not. If it wasn't, and he thought, I'm going to teach this guy a lesson, he's nothing, he's silver spoon, he's this, he's that, and come flying at him, then Whittaker would have just scythed him down. But he didn't do that. And as it was a good 10 rounds at a high tempo, and he nearly got rid of him right at the very end. I still think there's more to come from him, Whittaker, with regard to the punching power. I don't think it's that he doesn't kind of sit down on the punches necessarily, but I don't think he gets his feet quite close enough when he's throwing that right hand, to the point where sometimes when it lands, or he pulls off it just a little bit. I think if he got his feet a little bit closer and really, as Barry would say, just punched through the target and let it go, just shoot it really straight. I think there's more to come from him on the punching front. I spoke to Barry McGuigan next to you after the fight, and he definitely thinks that, doesn't he? And I was saying, well, maybe the power, and he just shut me down straight away, didn't he? And said, no, the power's there. It just needs to be extracted.
Yeah, it's an interesting one with Ben Whittaker, because I think, like, quite often is the case, you do look at the punch mechanics of somebody. This notion that punches, you either can punch or you can't, I don't think is necessarily true. You can certainly improve, and punch mechanics is part of that, and he has pretty good punch mechanics, but it's that punching through the target and also knowing that you can set your feet and punch hard from rounds 1 to 10. Not every shot has to be hard. Obviously, you layer shots, and sometimes you might touch, and sometimes you might, Barry's not here, he hates that, and sometimes you sit down and plant your feet, but it's 2 fights in a row now where we've seen that from him probably earlier in the contest, but as the fight's drawn on, I don't know whether or not Whittaker is entirely comfortable or confident in his ability to do that for 10 rounds or for 8 rounds, as we saw in his last fight.
And that's kind of fair enough, given where he is, because he dictated the tempo, and as the great man, as Barry always says, if you're fighting at your pace, even if it's a high pace, you're comfortable because you're setting the pace. And that's what happened. Arenyeka would try and explode out and do something every now and again, and he wasn't completely passive, but Whittaker controlled the fight. But he did push himself pretty hard, I thought. I said to Mackley before the end, about 3 rounds to go, it'd be good to see him really click through the gears, not because we're desperate for the stoppage, but just because you take the opportunity to really push yourself and kind of work on that gas tank. And then right at the end, he did nearly stop him. And I definitely didn't see that coming, because that's quite unusual when someone's not really shown any sign of unravelling. And then all of a sudden, one combination, 3-4 punches, straight punch to the front of the face. So a straight on punch. And stunning somebody with one of them, it's not that easy a thing to do. It's usually the rotation you get from, that side-to-side rotation you get from somebody on the jaw that does that. So he just left us with that, Whittaker, which was good.
Yeah, and I think to kind of echo other Barry McGuigan, who says he can definitely punch, and he's shown that he has enough spite in his work. Do wonder about the training situation. This is 2 fights in a row now that we've not seen Sugar Hill in the corner or in the camp. Obviously was with Tyson Fury, kind of the fight before, but not for this one. So interesting to see, because he's now 27, which I had to kind of, it made me feel really old, as it always does when you see these young whippersnappers who are all of a sudden catching you up in age, and you realise they're not catching you up, you're just getting older.
Yeah, he's just getting older.
But he's 27 now, and I did an American podcast when I was over for Canelo Munguia, and it was your typical American podcast, shout out the boxing voice, where you sit there and shout at each other for as long as possible. And you know me, Andy, I could fucking do that all day. Yeah. No problem at all.
They picked the right man for that.
Yeah, you're not going to outlast me, man. We can sit here all day if we want. But they'd asked me about Ben Whittaker, and kind of it's sort of what we've spoken about in the past, where he's shown, and Barry Jones, when he talks about Calzaghe, see, we're getting all of the pivots in here as while he's away. Where he talks about how, knowing that he had all of that ability early in his career, it was about kind of showing him off and trying to get him fights where he could kind of showcase himself, and you knew that he had that grounding. And we've kind of spoken about this in the past with Whittaker. We did the main event with Castillo and Whittaker. Yeah, it
was good. I watched it.
Shout out Castillo.
I love the plantain thing. And I guess is that a Caribbean African thing, because my wife's African, and that plantain all day, every day.
It is, yeah.
But then Whittaker's argument that you don't say mountain, I just found really entertaining.
He sort of had Castillo stumped. I love how you revered broadcaster. That's the one takeaway that we had from the main event, which is actually the whole point of the whole thing.
Yeah, it is, exactly. Yeah, it was good. It was good. I enjoyed it.
I can't remember where I was going with that. Now
Training.
What was was I saying about training? What was he
Well, I
saying
think
about
what you're getting to is basically, what's he going to do? Because Sugar Hill's gone. He's training with Joby. He loves Joby. Joby loves him. He's an experienced coach. He's telling him the right thing in the corners. But ultimately, from what I hear, and Barry said it to us on the record on the Sky Post-Fight podcast, he is looking at other options, and one of them is McGuigan's gym. And he probably needs to make that decision fairly soon, doesn't he? And commit. It doesn't mean that Joby Clayton wouldn't be involved, but there is a lot of ability there.
There absolutely
and
is.
you've got to make sure you get every last ounce out of it. And if that's some kind of combination, some trainers wouldn't really go for that. I mean, that's their business, but 27 years old, that decision needs to be made.
Yeah, and I know where I was going with it now, because we were talking about kind of those gut checks and what have you. And in our prep session, myself and Castillo, I said, because one of the Castillo questions is when was the first time you realised you could fuck somebody up? Which is a brilliant question to ask any boxer, because we can't ask that. But somebody else.
It was a brilliant answer as well, because he talks about being at school and somebody doing this and that, and they hit him in the playground. It's exactly what Hay said to me when I spoke to Hay for the book, The Knockout. I just said to him, were you always a knockout merchant? And he took me back to when he was like 3 or 4 in the school playground, and he had a feather, and this kid nicked this feather off him, and he just chinned it. and when I was watching Castillo with Ben Whittaker, I thought, oh, okay. That's where it starts for a lot of them.
Because if you say, when's the last time you realised you could box? It's, when I was 16, I did this tournament. It's like, when you realise you could box somebody up.
Yeah.
I was 3 or 4. But I said anyway, one of the questions was, when did you realise you'd been in with somebody, or you were in somebody and you were like, whoa? And I'd sent him that fight beforehand, Castillo, and I said, I wonder if he says this. And we've seen that in the amateurs. He's shown those kind of, that grounding, that metal that you need. But now we are getting into the stage where he's getting on in it. He's getting on. He's 27. I'd fucking love to be 27
Yeah,
again.
I mean, he's not far off his physical peak.
Yeah.
Basically.
And so getting that plan, and you mentioned there about Barry speaking on the record about him training at McGuigan's gym. McGuigan's gym isn't the busy gym that it was. I mean, it's still got a fair few fighters in there, but it doesn't have a Coley in there anymore. Obviously, kind of more recent years, your Luke Campbell's, Anthony Fowler, fighters like that.
Yeah, he's got 5 or 6, hasn't
Daniel
he?
Dubois.
He's got Liazims, he's got Caroline.
He's got
Chris, he's got Ellie Scottney, Craig Richards. Is that it?
Yes.
That's 6, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's not. So perhaps that could be the way that he goes. But yeah, 27. You just want to get him on that track, boxing regularly. We all know how talented he is. Where next for him? Obviously, Dan Aziz wasn't at his best on the undercard against Hervé Osep. Is that a potential for him? Ricard Bolotniks is kind of another guy in and around that sort of fringe level.
I think it is those kinds of guys. Craig
Richards.
That would be another one. They've sparred, haven't they? Recently, a couple of times. Yeah, I think. I mean, Sepp wouldn't be the worst idea, because it's kind of funny. Me and John Dennon were beating the drum for him during the week, just saying, listen, we weren't saying it was a bad fight for Aziz, because I felt that Dan's the kind of guy where you need a little bit of fear. You need to put him in with somebody decent, because that's what he'll want. He won't want some kind of easy night. But as it turned out, he did fall into one of those age-old traps that you never mean to, but sometimes you do, whereby he was just a bit flat coming into a fight off the back of main eventing against Buatsi. He started a bit flat, and you can't really do that against someone like him, because he was a really, really good amateur. So if they can't get a really kind of sexy, if you like, British opponent, which would be Craig Richards or Shakan Pitters or someone like that.
Do that in Wolverhampton.
Yeah, exactly. Or someone like that, then Sepp would be a pretty good idea, I think.
Sepp, Bolotniks, those kind of guys.
Yeah, those kinds of guys. Yeah, Sepp and Bolotniks boxed, and they had a really close fight. So it's that kind of thing.
Okay, right. Moving away from the UK and onto stateside for the return of Gervonta Tank Davis, a crushing 8th round stoppage win over Frank Martin. I mean, he seems to do it every time. We kind of look at Davis, and that's kind of the tendency is for people to look at things he doesn't do and rounds that he loses, but in a much different way, really, to what we talked about earlier with Deontay Wilder and Richard Riakporhe. There's an air of inevitability, and when he goes through the gears and when he clicks into action, he really is something to watch, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. He's one of my favourites, because I'd love to have spoken to him for the book, because he's one of these guys who you don't think Gervonta Davis and think massive banger, but he is somebody who is always looking to win the fight inside the distance, whenever that may be. That is his sole mission, is that he's going to do what he needs to do to make sure that at some point he takes you out. And quite often that means you're doing quite well until all of a sudden you're not. And that's exactly what happened at the weekend. I mean, he was taken over anyway by that stage, wasn't he? But I thought he started pretty well, Frank Martin. He gave her an interesting interview after the fight where he kind of broke it down, didn't he? And he said, I was moving a lot in the early stages. But this is how somebody gets in your head, because I was moving a lot in the early stages and that was kind of working well. But then I think, well, maybe I'm moving too much because, when I slow down, then that's when he's going to look to get to me. And I'm kind of paraphrasing or adding, embellishing, but you can see that this is probably what's in his mind as he's in the ring. So I probably better stop moving quite so much, or slow it down a bit. But then I slowed it down a bit and I realised that moving was what was really working, but I've slowed it down then, and he's kind of on top of me and I can't really lift the gear back, and then I get knocked out. And the knockout was tremendous because he stunned him with the uppercut. And I do kind of see these things a bit differently now, and when he stunned him with the uppercut, I immediately thought, oh no. Like, he's completely defenceless. But Davis is that quick that the referee is never going to be able to get in and stop it before he lands another one, which was always going to be accurate, and bang, done. He just has he is something. He really is.
He just has that wonderful way of making you work in those early rounds. I mean, by his own admission, I feel like he felt he gave too many shots away to Frank Martin earlier in the fight. He had some markings after the fight, and as you mentioned there, Frank Martin, good fighter, very capable fighter in his own right, and had some success. But when it got to 5 and 6, where you could just start to see Martin slow down, the fact that
and that's so far out from the tape
exactly.
as well.
And you're making a point earlier about Ben Whittaker and fighters kind of setting the pace. When somebody's making you work and making you overwork and constantly keeping you engaged, we've seen it with Usyk, we've seen it with Gennady Golovkin, these great pressure fighters, Canelo Alvarez, different in a sense of volume from your Canelos and Tanks to Usyk and even Golovkin. But they just constantly look like they have time, and you're the guy who's operating in 5th, 6th, 7th gear at times. Yeah. And eventually it just drains the gas tank, and you find yourself as a sitting duck. But
it was one of them, wasn't it, actually? Because generally you do see that. Like I say, you see that normally against somebody with massive power, and one fighter feels that power early and they start to panic a bit, and all of a sudden they're operating at a million miles an hour, and the other person's just kind of wandering about like they're off to order a drink at the bar. Yeah. And you have these like two completely different speeds that the fight's going at. And it was a bit like that. And I guess it's because there's just far too much going on in Martin's head at that point, because it's just lodged firmly in there that I can't start slow because he'll love that. If I start too quick, I'm probably going to slow down. And it just, like, there's no real... You're fucked if you're doing that, aren't you, basically? Yeah, you need to be concentrating on what's in front of you. Yeah. And that's what what punchers do, and what they make you do, and make you he spoke about kind of, I was moving too much, because again, he's wary of being hit and he wants to do, and it's just a wonderful way of getting inside your head. And Davis is a master at it. You can see when he's in there in those 4, 5 and 6, and he can start feeling Martin slow down, the look of pleasure on his face, knowing that I'm going to get to you in a minute. Yeah. Mentally he's draining you just by being him. But he's also chipping away at you. We were talking earlier about the ability to set punches up, and he's figuring it out, he's figuring it out exactly what he's going to do, and then he does it. Where does that leave Gervonta Davis now? Obviously, we are in the post-Devin Haney era at lightweight. Not to say that he's any better or worse fighter than Gervonta Davis, but as an undisputed champion as he was, he would have been the man. He moved up, and it's now kind of broken away. 135 has been, the second division, really, behind the heavyweight division over the last few years. Where does he sit amongst that now? We've obviously got Shakur Stevenson, who holds the WBC, Gervonta Davis, who holds the WBA. The IBF is a certain Vasily Lomachenko, which we're going to come on and talk about. And then Dennis Berinchik. Dennis the Menace. Little plucky Dennis Berinchik with the WBO. Big Dennis Berinchik fans here on the Boxing Show. Gervonta Davis, the number one in the division for you now? Well, I mean, it's kind of tricky, isn't it? Because I think he probably is, yeah. I think if they all boxed each other, I think he would come out on top. But at the same time, Lomachenko's got a hell of a resume, hasn't he? So it depends how you try and work it out. But I would say that I would back him against, if they had a big round robin, if they had a tournament, which would be tremendous, I would back him, I think. The problem he's got is that, well, it's not exactly a problem, but he's this massive star at PBC, and he has crossed over, and he does tap into a big kind of mainstream fan base, doesn't he? So really, PBC could put him in with anybody, and most of the people watching don't really care. They're not bothered, are they?
No.
And that's an amazing position to be in. And what it means is that you don't need anyone else. And whether he goes after those kinds of fights and kind of insists on them happening, because if he did insist, then they would have to happen. He's got to that point, doesn't he, I think, where he's probably that powerful. Can he be bothered, though, to kind of go after Shakur Stevenson and Lomachenko with the problems there would be because of the fact that they're both with Top Rank, basically?
Well, shout out Andy Purwell.
Does he need to?
Well, that's it, isn't it? And it becomes that question. And that's at times, because I've always been, and people who watch the show in its various iterations over the years know I'm a massive Gervonta Davis fan. And there have been times where it's been difficult to be a massive Gervonta Davis fan because he hasn't always had those massive opportunities or always had those big fights. We've not seen him in with a Teofimo Lopez or a Devin Haney. Obviously, we saw him in with Ryan Garcia. But at the time, I felt like we all felt that he was still, as much as we were very sort of intoxicated by the fight more than anything, it was sort of the magic around it. And more that fight kind of, what it symbolised in a sense of two young guys who didn't need to fight each other, fighting each other, but there was always a clear, certainly in our estimation, favourite going into that fight. But we're now at the stage where, as I said, shout out Andy Purwell, sat down with the Bob Father himself at Top Rank HQ. It's always great when you get the call to go to Top Rank HQ. It's fucking old fight. They've got the fight library. Have you never? No, mate, it's great. When you sit in the lobby of the office, they've got like a glass panel and you can see the archive. They've got the Top Rank archive with all of the film and everything that you could ever want to see. It's brilliant, lovely place to go. But Andy went in there and spoke to the Bob Father, who held court, and told him that there had been negotiations, ongoing negotiations, as he recalled it, between Gervonta Davis and Vasily Lomachenko. I think when we spoke about, when we did our preview of 2024, I don't think it was the fight that I wanted to see, but it is right up there.
Yeah.
Like for over the period of time. That is a fight where we've all been kind of clamoring for it for a long time now. That's sort of 6-7 years in the making. It's stylistically a brilliant fight. You've got somebody in Lomachenko who can make the fight. That's sort of the thing with Davis is very low output, obviously massive punching power and kind of sizes you up. But somebody like Lomachenko is the exact opposite of that, who wants to come, set a pace, make you work, break you down, find angles, very offensive fighter.
And they're kind of the same size as well, aren't they?
Yeah, because
that's
Davis
what I like
really
about it.
Is like, this. I was thinking about this.
It's not like, when Loma was in with Lopez and Haney, and they're just miles bigger than him because he's not really a lightweight, is he? He never has been.
No, and Davis is, this notion that, and we've spoken about it in the past, that you have to be a 4, 5, 6 weight world champion. And I know Davis has gone up and down the weights to a degree, sort of between 30 and 40, really. No more than that. And he only dipped his toes in at 40 for one fight against Mario Barrios. But he's not a huge lightweight at all.
No.
Like, he still could make 130. He weighed in 133 point something or other at the weigh-in the other day. They had an afternoon weigh-in, which was the official weigh-in, not the ceremonial weigh-in. I'm not sure how much Frank Martin enjoyed the 3 o'clock weigh-in, but still, Davis was... he did a backflip when he got off the scale, so you can tell, but 133, he probably could have made 130 if you'd have said to him. And he's now at that age as well, where it's not like, Lopez or Haney cramming themselves into a weight when they're 22, 23, and their body could allow for it, or 24, 25, as it may be. Davis is now 29, so he's making that weight healthily. He's not going to grow anymore. He is what he is. He's not going to be a 147 fighter or 154 fighter, as we may see from Devin Haney or Teofimo Lopez in the future. So, size-wise, I think that's a better fight than kind of it's been in the past for Lomachenko and Lopez and Lomachenko and Haney. But it is a fight that I do lean towards Davis in. I do feel like that young, fresh athleticism and the punching power. Lomachenko, for all of his amazing offensive work and his ability to evade punches and come back with his own, he is there to be hit. And, it's very difficult to hit him, but he is still there. He's not somebody who's going to be on the back foot trying to...
No, he's in that tight semicircle, isn't he? Like
Yeah.
Usyk, you know, and that's the glory of them, isn't it? That they're not up on their toes, flying around the place. They're amazing movers, but they move really, really close to you.
Yeah, and they've got one guy who's looking to land 6 or 7 shots and break you down, and one guy who's looking to land 1 and take your head off.
Yeah.
And that kind
there's a lot to like about
Mate,
it.
even like the fan bases of warred on social media over the years. You've got kind of the PBC tank brigades, and you've got the top rank, like Eastern European, like everyone loves Usyk and that kind of, that's what you need in boxing. That tribalism is always such an alluring point to it. Here's a fight. What about Gervonta Davis versus Naoya Inoue at 130? Do you think that we could ever see that fight?
I mean, it's not impossible, is it? I feel like, in a way, he could maybe venture up to super feather. You'd have thought he probably will, because he'll do whatever he's going to do at featherweight, but we feel like it's kind of there for him in a lot of ways.
The fights are there for him, which I think is at featherweight, and it may be a case where he goes to 130, and if like, you know, for kind of full disclosure, obviously he's got a lot to do. He's still boxing at 122 at the minute before he goes to featherweight, and the featherweight champions are very good, but for the good thing for Inoue is they're all seemingly very makeable fights. I mean, as is often the case.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah,
when you've got loads of money, you've got loads of money. When you bring a lot of money to the table and you've got that mentality of Inoue who wants to fight the biggest and best, that's why the fights happen for him, don't they? One of the best things.
It won't take if he, let's say he does manage to do it and unify that division as well. It's not like it'll take ages.
No. Also, he could go to 126, and he's already been undisputed champion at 118 and 122. Could go to 126, win a title, and then say, well, I actually feel quite good at 126. There's a big payday on the table to box Davis at 130 and do it there.
Yeah.
I think obviously there's a lot that needs to happen for that fight to take place.
But it's not beyond the realms of possibility.
We're just starting to think about it now. When you see that Davis is 29 and he looks like he makes lightweight pretty easily, pretty healthily. He looked, I mean, as healthy as one can look getting off the scales. But I haven't seen too many people do backflips or getting off the scale.
You need some energy to do that.
Yeah, just a little bit. I don't think Frank Martin would have been doing a roly-poly if you'd have asked him to do it after he got off the stage. So, it's a fight that initially, and like, there's probably going to be people watching this, these fucking idiots talking about this fight. But initially when it was mentioned, I was like, that's not going to happen. That's ridiculous. Like, Davis, you fight at 135, then you start, go to 140. Then you think, well, why would he go to 140?
No, well, that's it. And what you said a few minutes ago about this obsession with going through the weights,
I've
never agreed with it. And obviously, you know, if you start at a low weight and that's when you're young, and you have a decent, good, long career and everything, you will move through those weights because the boundaries between them are not that big. You know, you go 8 stone, 8 stone 3, 8 stone 6, 8 stone 10, 9 stone, 9 4, 9 9, 10. You know, that's a lot of weight divisions within not much weight. So if you're around that mark, then you probably are going to become a multiple weight world champion. But there's certainly no requirement for people to do that to be a great fighter. I don't see how that makes any sense, because one of my least favourite things is seeing somebody step up in weight and get beaten because they're not big enough.
Yeah, you're clearly too small.
What's the point of that?
Yeah. It's something that's become a little bit more, I think, feasible, or a little bit less ridiculous, should we say, over recent times. So just one second. Final one on Gervonta Davis and Frank Martin. I mean, a lot of kind of conversation over the years, and we're gonna venture into the realms of the bullshit. A lot of the conversations around Gervonta Davis and kind of pound for pound, is he a pound for pound fighter? You know, some people will say that we mentioned earlier on about his resume. We've not seen him against Haney, we've not seen him against Lopez, but we have seen him against Barrios, who's now a world champion at 147. We've seen him, beat good. Frank Martin would beat a lot of lightweights, and I'm sure if he boxes at lightweight or moves up to 140, he'll beat some good fighters there. Is Gervonta Davis for you a pound for pound attraction? Does he make the coveted, the vaunted Andy Clarke pound for pound top 10?
I think he probably does. Yeah, probably does make my top 10. I generally, with the pound for pound, don't tend to venture much beyond a top 5 or a kind of top 3. I kind of quite like it as a discussion. It's fun, but it doesn't really mean anything. Ultimately, it's difficult to quantify it. Although at the minute, I think it's probably quite easy, actually. I mean,
the top 3 is very
Usyk, Inoue, Crawford, and whichever order you've got it in is just, kind of, it's what you like.
Yeah.
Although I would say it probably should be Usyk because he's
it's
just
what you
beaten-
like, but you're wrong. If
He's
you've
beating a
not-
guy who's 40 plus pounds heavier than him. You know, that's if you're gonna, whatever pound for pound means, and I know what it means, but it's yeah. I think so, yeah, because he's got a very, very high technical ability level, and he's good to watch, isn't he? And I think with boxing, when I'm factoring in how it's about the all-round package for me. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to. That's not about social media followers. That's about, do people really enjoy watching you? Do you take big fights? So you bang up for it. Are you a star, basically? And I think he is. He definitely is one, isn't he?
Yeah, and he's one of those fighters who. There's a few fighters who are different when you watch them, and he's somebody who.
I'd love to. I've never seen him in the flesh.
Shout out, fucking.
I'd love to.
Boxer for putting on a show on the same night as Tank and Benavidez or Paro bloody living the life over in Vegas. Not that I didn't enjoy getting piss wet through at Selhurst Park, by the way. It was great.
It kind of works, Selhurst Park, I thought, though, but mainly because it looked good on TV. Though it looked good on TV when I watched it back yesterday. I watched bits of it.
Watched it at home. Though, dry.
But what did impress me about it was that the crowd were bang up for it. Despite the weather, they were bang up for it.
Yeah, because they had cover. But
if they were sat in the stands, they did, yeah.
But yeah, with Davis over the years, it has been that, I always used to say, and I've said it on here, like, the fighter, when you talk to trainers about him, like, I mean, the fan kind of discourse is, it's very difficult, as we all know, even the people in this room know, kind of difficult to have a reasonable conversation with people about boxing at the best of times, but certainly when you're discussing, polarizing fighters and figures in the sports, even more so. But over the years, when speaking to fighters or trainers who watch Davis, they all mention how good of a fighter he is, how technically proficient he is, how he's so much more than just a power puncher. I feel like we're starting to see that now in recent times with his performances. And indeed, if he boxes Lomachenko, you're not going to beat Lomachenko if you're just a puncher. And I feel like that is what I would give him the edge in that fight, is the fact that he's very, very skilled, as well as having that lights out power and showing that he can hurt you early, he can hurt you in the middle rounds, he can hurt you late in the fight.
And I think that's what I mean really when I said earlier on, when I think of Gervonta Davis, the first thing I think isn't massive banger, although he does definitely have that power, because he's so much more than that.
Cerebral with it, isn't he?
Yeah, he's so much more than that. And that's why it's so dangerous, because he's able to set it up and then uppercut left hand and you're unconscious. And it's happened really, really quickly. And he hasn't seemed to have put all that much into it. So he's not that kind of, testosterone-fueled, kind of swaggering KO artist. When you think about him like that, he almost doesn't really fit that mould. But he actually is one.
Sort of like with him and in a way, like they do so many things that are not kind of power related, but add to the power, like technique and knowing when to step on the gas and finding an opening, but not you seeing an opening and thinking, okay, in a couple of rounds that opening is going to be a little bit bigger, and
it'll be taken in a really clinical, efficient way, where the result will be the drama, but the actual delivery of the punches, that won't be what. It'll be what they do that shocks you.
Yeah, there was a wonderful kind of side by side. It was one above and one below of Gervonta Davis and Inoue's most recent knockouts. So Inoue against Luis Neri, and of course this weekend against Frank Martin, where it's the uppercut straight from the lead hand. No, not from the lead hand, it's the backhand. Obviously Inoue with the right and Davis with the left. Such a cool thing to watch both of them. I'd love to. Like, it's nice that they like each other as well. So it was quite nice. Although we hopefully get to see them fight in Tokyo maybe. But anyway, moving on. Let's talk about. There's plenty to talk about on the Gervonta Davis undercard, but we're going to touch on David Benavidez and Alexander Gvozdyk. David Benavidez up 175 pounds against somebody in Alexander Gvozdyk who's been there, seen it, and done it at light heavyweight, albeit not in a few years. Felt like a clear win for David Benavidez, but a fight where I think maybe we saw that there's still a little ways to go for the Mexican monster.
Yeah, and he's in a bit of limbo at the minute, isn't he, really? Because we all want him to fight Canelo, but that doesn't really matter, because whether that's going to happen or not depends on whether Canelo wants it to happen. And it would appear at the minute that he's not really that bothered. And if you're Benavidez, you need to come up with an alternative plan, don't you? And kind of banish that from your mind, because if you don't, it can get into your head. and that could translate into, it could affect your performance, basically. I think is what I'm trying to say. And he was decent enough, wasn't he? Gvozdyk's really, he's a good fighter, but hasn't boxed that much in recent times. We thought we'd seen the last of him. He thought he was done, and then he came back. So it's definitely a good win, but that's my worry with someone like Benavidez, particularly given what's happened to him previously. He managed to kind of lose his way quite comprehensively earlier in his career, but he got his shit together, and he's in this second chapter, but you don't want to see him kind of start to drift again, because I fear that it could happen. And if you become too distracted by a name, then it can bring things like that into play.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Benavidez is a big name in his own right, but it sort of draws some sort of parallels between Arenyeka and Mayweather.
That was exactly the example that was popped into my head as I was talking, because he never really happened for him at welterweight, Arenyeka, and one of the reasons, I think, and he ended up stepping up and fighting Canelo because that was going to make him $10 million rather than the 2.5. He explained it to me. He said, look, I could take that fight for 10 rather than have 4 hard camps and hard fights for 2.5 each. I knew there was a chance I'd get chinned by Canelo, but I did the maths. And he ended up doing it because he thought he was going to fight Mayweather, didn't he? And get that level of payday. And then he didn't. And so that's a great example, because that shows what that kind of did to his head almost. That he was actually happy to step up and fight someone who was miles bigger than him, because in his mind he needed to make that money that he should have made against Mayweather but didn't, because it never happened.
Yeah, I mean, you would hope that...
That's how muddled you can get, I guess, isn't it?
I was going to say, you would hope that David Benavidez being enough of an attraction by himself, but Arenyeka was enough of an attraction by himself. He wasn't, as you mentioned there, $2.5 million paydays. It's not chump change. It's not peanuts. There's very few fighters who are in positions to make that sort of money. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with him. I do feel that he didn't have the same physicality. I remember I was in Vegas for the beautiful place, Vegas. Oh, I miss it. I'm going next weekend. Anyway, the press conference, the initial announcement press conference. I remember we stood across from Alexander Gvozdyk. I remember thinking, fucking no, size of Alexander Gvozdyk. That is a natural, fully fledged light heavyweight. And David Benavidez, for all of his size and the fact that he is a monster, the Mexican monster, 168 pounds, moving up to 175, it's not a small jump. And these guys are big boys at 175 pounds. And I felt like, certainly early in the fight, his punch selection, the accuracy of David Benavidez is not something that really gets talked about enough, I don't think. The fact that he's a big punch-in super middleweight, he puts his, I say big punch-in, he's got a lot of highlight reel knockouts. It's more the combination punch-in and the speed that he puts his shots together. But he lands as well, head to body, mixes the shots up really nicely. And for the first 4 or 5 rounds, he really tattooed Gvozdyk. But then the additional weight on him, and of course we've spoke about this in the past, where you've got not only the additional weight that you're carrying around, but the target you're hitting is, 1, hitting you back heavier, 2, it's heavier in the clinch. You don't have that same capability to manhandle fighters as you did down at 168 pounds. I mean, his last fight was against Demetrius Andrade. Demetrius Andrade is really a middleweight. It's a 54 pounder when he first came on the scene. So it may make him think twice about, he sort of put his flag in the sand, as it were, as I want Bivol, I want Beterbiev, I want to become undisputed. And then after the fight, whether or not it was something that was kind of pre-planned, start to talk about going back down to 168 pounds again and potentially boxing Canelo Alvarez. David Morrell's a fight that is, probably one more for the hardcore amongst us, but a brilliant fight at 168 pounds. David Morrell is also boxing with PBC. I think he's on that August the 3rd card as well. So there are fights there for him. But if you're, again, you mentioned there about Khan and Mayweather, and it's the same for Benavidez. Do you want to box David Morrell for 1.5 mil? Or do you want to box these guys for this? Or do you want, he said he'd take 5 million for Canelo, which, only 5 million. But still, that's the fight, isn't it? That's the one to make you the superstar. And if he doesn't get that fight, it's interesting to see where he may go, because at light heavyweight, Bivol and Beterbiev are as good as anybody in the sport. Yeah. But they're not huge names either. And
that's why it's taken Saudi Arabia to make that fight happen, because for Undisputed, because otherwise it just doesn't nearly pay for itself in terms of what they would feel they need to get paid for a fight of that magnitude compared to what it would generate revenue wise. It just doesn't remotely cover its own costs.
Yeah, absolutely. He did talk about going to cruiserweight. I mean, Chris Billam-Smith said that he'd be more than happy to fight David Benavidez. I think I was actually watching the Benavidez fight with him after 4 rounds. He went, yeah, maybe not. Like, he looks pretty good. But yeah, I mean, that Canelo fight, I mean, you never know. It's interesting. Like, it's
Things
difficult.
can change quick, can't they?
Yeah, and also, like, we've spoken about this in several instances. Like, there's no scared of. There's no. You don't become Canelo Alvarez by being scared of anybody.
Maybe he just kind of looks at Benavidez and for whatever reason just thinks, look, I don't really like you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to give you it. Or I'm going to make you wait for it.
But Alexander Gvozdyk, part of the Canelo team, managed by Eddie Reynoso as well. Canelo could have just had a look at him. And, you know, if you're Canelo looking at that Benavidez fight, I don't think you see anything in there that scares you. I don't think you look at that and think, oh, well, you know, I can't do this or I can't do that. You say a fight with 168 pounds, £10 rehydration clause, second day weigh-in at
you have it all
10 minutes before the ring walk.
That's it. You have it all on your terms, which is where he's been for a long time. And that's the privilege of being a massive star, whether people like it or not. And he knows himself that jump up from 168 to 175 is a thing. I mean, he knows, doesn't he? It doesn't mean that he doesn't still want to do it, but he felt it when he boxed Bivol. So he knows, or he'll have a good idea that Benavidez will probably be amenable to coming back down to 168 and will probably want to. Will definitely want to if it means a fight with him. Yeah, I mean, he was saying that beforehand. Before the fight, it was, you know, I'd only go to 168, back down to 168 for Canelo, and then after the fight, it's slightly different. But I mean, it's far one for me to say it, but you know, he doesn't always look body beautiful. Benavidez, it looks like he's more of a fleshy body type. He's still young enough where you'd feel like his body has the elasticity to come back down to 168 anyway. So yeah, you'd feel that, you know, that is still going to be part of the conversation. How much of the conversation and how quickly it moves on to, you know, 200 million from Canelo's perspective is anyone's guess. I still feel like they're going to try and do Canelo versus Crawford. As much as Canelo says, look, there's nothing in it for me, there's nothing this. I think if he gets the right price for that fight, I mean, what you said about earlier with fighters moving up in weight and getting beaten purely by size might be put to the test, Andy, because I agree. I think it probably will happen because the funds are available to make it happen, and people will want to see it. And 100%, I would obviously watch it and would be very, very keen to be there and be working on it. But it is in that bracket for me of a fight where I just think that's too much, isn't it? 147 to, and I know we all kind of feel like we know that Crawford was bursting out of his skin at 147 and is a 154. But as Charlo found out, if you're a massive 154 and bursting out of your skin at that weight, that's a colossal jump up to 168, particularly if you're going to get in with him. Maybe he is slightly on the downward slope, as we've discussed before. But as I said earlier on, you know, if you've always lived a life, then you can halt that decline as much as it can be halted, and he's definitely in that category. So I think we will see it, and I'll be fascinated by it. But it's got to be in that category, hasn't it? I mean, how can it end any other way? How can Crawford beat him, given that weight difference?
Yeah, I sort of don't want to see it, but we'll obviously watch it for the same reasons that you've just alluded to there. Right, okay, we're going to move on. Before we do, a little rundown of some of the highlights from the PBC card. I'm looking at this, there's nothing on here, it's just a way for me to concentrate. But anyway, Kyron Davis, there's genuinely nothing on here. Kyron Davis with a win over Elijah Garcia. Albert Puello with an upset win over Gary Antoine Russell at £140. Also a win for Martin Magsayo and a few others as well. But moving on to the final card that we will be discussing on today's review show, Andy, and the new IBF super lightweight champion of the world, Liam Paro, went into the Lion's Den of Puerto Rico against Subriel Matias, the boogeyman, one of the most dangerous men in the sport, and upset the apple cart, pitching the perfect game, really, and securing the unanimous decision win to become the new IBF champion at super lightweight. What a massive win that is for Liam Paro.
It's an absolutely monumental win, and I don't think it's necessarily gone under the radar, but given that Davis was fighting that weekend and we had plenty going on over here, it maybe has a little bit because it's a huge, huge win. I was chatting with Brian Peters in Saudi a couple of weeks ago because he had Ray Ford over there, and we were talking about
funny old places. Doesn't he? Ray Ford there, he had Liam Paro in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, he's a fascinating guy, Brian Peters. And he was just saying, the things he got coming up, and I forgot that he got Liam Paro. And I thought to myself, and Brian says something like, it's a tough job, but we fancy it. And I thought, well, he can't really say much else, can he? I wasn't expecting it. I really wasn't expecting it. It's a bit of a disaster for Matias, to be honest, isn't it? Because it's a homecoming to Puerto Rico, and everything's gone so well in recent times. For him to lose that fight, and he definitely did lose, I don't know what he'll be thinking today, tomorrow, the rest of this week. That is an enormous spanner in the works, to say the least.
It certainly is. He's somebody who had kind of this fandom, really, hadn't he? Become like one of the, streets will never forget boxers. A real favourite of the hardcore, Subriel Matias. He was fantastic in wins over Batir Jukumbayev. He had that win over Ergashev, Jeremias Ponce, looked fantastic in all of these fights. But, hasn't been the most difficult to hit at times, which we've all kind of discussed in the past. It's when you're a puncher like that, we've also discussed the arrogance of a puncher, where you don't feel that you need to do the work. Eventually I'm going to get to you. But he just was never really allowed to. Liam Paro showed, as well as unbelievable skill, the amount of bottle that he showed in there. Because you could tell, certainly I think it was the 6th round when Matias started to really get on top of him. You start to think like, okay, well, this is where he usually starts to go to work, Matias. And he does have that crippling punching power in either hand where the shots don't need to move very far, and every time he touches a fighter, it looks like they get a reaction. But Paro kind of had that Aussie steel about him, don't they? They all have that. The fucking Aussies, we're English over here, so shout out the Aussies. But they all have that kind of that steeliness, don't they, inside where you
look at the current crop, and they all definitely do.
Yeah,
you look at Opataya and the Maloney's.
Yeah. Exactly, they've all got that metal, and he really showed it in spades. I thought it was and of course, people will talk about, a disaster for Matchroom as well as Matias. Liam Paro is a Matchroom fighter. Of course, his last fight beat Montana Love. Matchroom are well invested in that area of the world down under. So a huge win for him, and at a division as well where, Devin Haney still has the 140-pound title, works with Matchroom as well. They've got Dalton Smith there, so that's another potential option for Dalton Smith and some of the other guys that've got 140 pounds. But yeah, I mean, it was a weekend full of upsets. I mean, whether you kind of agree Chris Billam-Smith being an
I guess with Matias, we end up talking about this quite a lot, don't we? About how fighters, and this is just the human condition, really, tend to just repeat the mistakes that people make in the past, because we're all humans, and that's what humans basically do, isn't it? And you go in with someone and you feel like you're going to be able to knock them out, and you don't pay enough attention to the fact that he's not just going to let you do it. You're going to have to set it up. You're going to have to earn it. You go in there feeling like you don't have to earn it. It's just going to happen. That's a recipe for disaster, and we've seen it so many times down the years. It's just a form of complacency, isn't it? Basically, you feel like I'm at home, I'm a massive puncher, and in your mind it translates to he will cooperate, and no one's ever going to cooperate at that level. You've got to earn it, and he didn't, did he?
No.
And sometimes you can do that and get away with it. But he didn't get away with it this weekend.
No, and it will, and it's it's not just as easy as people always talk about it with Mike Tyson. It's not just as easy as standing up to him. It requires a hell of a lot of skill and a hell of a lot of bottle, which Liam Paro showed in spades. But it's a massive win for him. I think for Matias, when you consider it's a homecoming fight, and look, people are not even after that going to be rushing into getting the ring with him. He doesn't bring an awful lot of money to the table, and more importantly now, even he's somebody really his value is in that belt, and he doesn't have it anymore. There's no rematch clause as well, which kind of
he's a really good example of that, isn't he? He's someone who, why on earth would you fight him if he didn't have something to offer, which he currently doesn't? Yeah,
it's just a hard night's work for anybody, and you just think like, actually probably not.
Yeah, exactly.
But he's going
to have to work his way back into mandatory, isn't he?
He goes into that kind of, don't want to speak, I don't know who his manager is, he might collar me at a show next time. It kind of goes into that sort of the arrogance of the puncher in the ring. It's like, well, we don't need a rematch clause. Well, fucking Liam Paro's a good fighter. Well, I don't need a rematch clause. We'll go through this guy. You're sort of in the ring, well, don't worry. You win a few rounds.
I don't know why you would ever do that. Again, boxing history just shows you just stick it in. It's not going to take long, is it? Get the lawyer to cut and paste it into the contract.
See,
it's not
Barry
going to
goes
take
away
long.
for 1 week, and we're championing for rematch clauses here. This is what happens on the boxing show.
Well, it doesn't make any.
The game is the game.
It doesn't make any sense, does it? Not to have one. You should. I think they should be banned myself, particularly if you've worked your way into
A mandatory slot,
position.
absolutely, yeah.
But we all know that that kind of ruling's never going to be put into place. So you should just have one.
You certainly should, and I'm sure Mr. Matias, one of the many feelings that he was having the next day was, I regret not having a rematch clause. But yes, interesting to see how it plays out with the rest of the 140-pound division. But that's all we have time for today on the Boxing Show, a special twosome edition of the Boxing Show this week. Shout out Barry Jones. But from me, Rob Tebbutt, from Mr. Andy Clarke, thank you very much for joining us. 2 is better than none, and we'll catch up with you next week.